too low, we denature the protein, and that protein no longer functions. Can you think of anything else that might have affected the function of a protein in our bodies?
pH.
pH. And that's something the body pays very close attention to. Why? Why do I need to be concerned about proteins functioning correctly in my body?
So you can stay alive.
Well, that kind of sometimes like that idea. Sometimes that stress gets to you and you're just like, ah. Okay? Why? Always ask why. Just like the little 3-year-old sitting in the back seat going, why? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Why? 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 Think about this. Every cell of the body, the only product can be the protein, which means the protein has to do the work. If I denature that, I have now affected the entire function. Why do we need, when a person's body temperature reaches a certain amount, number, to be concerned? The what? Now, in body temperature, if that temperature reaches a certain number, and if they can't bring it down with like the Tylenol, ibuprofen, that sort of thing, it becomes a situation where other measures need to be taken for it to come down. Now, if it's a situation where the temperature's like at 100, 101, leave it alone. The body's doing its job. It's doing what it needs to do. Don't try to bring it down, okay? Because you're ruining the effects of what that temperature's doing. Now, if it begins to climb up, you maybe say, have a Tylenol, and it didn't come back down a little bit, you need to start getting concerned. The reason is the cells of the body that become the most important that it's affecting are the brain cells. And if that temperature, if it continues to go up and up and up, and it doesn't come down, and they don't take other measures to bring it down, the cells of the brain literally fry. And those cells, you do not get back. That's why death can ensue. So under normal conditions, if it's 99, 100, trust me on this. Leave it alone. Your body's doing what it needs to do. Deal with it. Get some cover, throw it off. Get some cover, throw it off. Whatever the case might be, drink plenty of fluids. Why am I telling you that?
Is it because that's the body's natural way of like its natural defense system against fighting foreign bacteria?
For the viruses that have tried to invade you, it's making the environment inhospitable. You bring that temperature down, it's now hospitable, and that virus will keep duplicating. Just saying. Flu season. Okay? So, we need to find out, we need to hopefully make sure that our proteins are going to be able to do their jobs. Now, the hormones they will affect the proteins, but they're doing it because the outcome is desired for the most part. So now, if I got to deal with hormones that can be water soluble, fat soluble, and then after those hormones are produced and I'm dependent on the bloodstream to carry them from place to place, I got to make sure they maintain their chemical composition en route. Now, blood is a high percentage of water, all right? And this is how we're going to transport them. If a hormone is water soluble, we stand the chance that things could go wrong. Well, if they're water soluble and they get secreted from the cell that made them, they've got to travel in the bloodstream. They get to travel freely. We're going to find in the next chapter, because of blood being what it is, the actual components of blood are very numerous. One of the things that we have in blood is the ability to have certain proteins that act as a transport. So in the transport of these chemicals, some of them may need what's termed the transport protein, some may not. So, water soluble, travel freely, and when they get to their target tissues with the target cell, the receptors are only going to be on the surface of the cell. So if the only thing they can do is bind to a receptor on the surface of the cell, how do they do anything? Hold on to that thought. If the chemical is fat soluble, we're going to need a transport protein. The transport protein, because these are fat soluble, they will get to cross the plasma membrane of the cell, because the plasma membrane of the cell is a phospholipid bilayer, meaning it will allow fat soluble materials to cross it. So a hormone that is considered lipid soluble, well, they're going to need the transport protein, they're going to make their way to the cell, and that chemical actually enters the cell. This means this one has to go to a receptor inside the cell, which for the most part is going to be directly on the DNA. So now I have these hormones, these chemicals, either binding to the receptor on the cell or moving across the membrane into the cell to a receptor. When this begins to take place, once again, the goal is for this chemical to alter the activity of the cell in some way. So, if it binds to a receptor, that chemical did not cross the membrane. What it did instead, it begins to, because do you guys remember how we have proteins in the plasma membrane? Do you remember how we had all different types of proteins? Okay, and proteins are going to start a chemical reaction. So if this protein is acting as a receptor, when the chemical connects to it, it causes a series of reactions to begin. And do you remember how in the membrane of the cell usually had like a little 3G protein complex, all that sort of stuff in the cell, the membrane? So basically what happens, we get some energy from ATP inside the cell. The actions begin to take place. The actions with the help of CAMP. Does anybody remember CAMP? Cyclic AMP? Didn't talk about this in bio.
I remember seeing it.
Yeah.
So here's what's going to have to take place, okay? When we have the cell and we've got a receptor, and that receptor attaches, and embedded all the way around that cell are all these proteins in the plasma membrane. On the inner part of it, if that protein is acting as a receptor, we got other little proteins on the inside that can start a series of chemical reactions. Like there's 3. And they're like, if this is my protein embedded, and this is the one right beside it, inside the cell, that'll start a action, which will fire up this one, and then this one actually gets to move. And when it does, activating those proteins, which are functioning as enzymes, because enzymes do the work. Does everybody remember that? Okay. That third one that got to move starts a series of events that take place in the cell. So that water soluble that had to go to a receptor that began a series of reactions causing different activities in the cell, it gets to act either directly on the DNA of this nucleus of the cell, or it can affect a protein already getting made. Which means if I begin my series of reactions and my end product, that end product now gets changed. And then what? Why? How could I make this make sense to me? Does this make sense to you? Yeah? Okay. Let's say for example. For example, did we not need a chemical, a hormone, from this anterior pituitary to go to the testes to help create or promote testosterone production so that sperm could mature? Yes, we did.